In 2003, a horrific murder case shocked the community and sparked heated debates for a long time. This was one of the most brutal dismemberment murders in local history, with chilling details that are not for the faint-hearted. In this video, we will uncover each detail, each clue of the case that shook the world, from the carefully concealed schemes to the reason no one could have ever expected. Watch until the end to uncover the truth behind this tragic case and join us as we unravel. What is the true line between guilt and justice? Grisly discovery by the Mazi River. On September 9, 2003, in Dongren City, Guizhou Province, a serious murder case occurred. The victim's body was severely decomposed, and all the evidence at the scene seemed to have been erased by time and the environment. When the case was reported, it quickly became one of the most terrifying murder and dismemberment cases in the local investigative history. The story begins at 5:30 in the morning, in Mazi Village, Shitian County, Dongren City. Baolin, a farmer from the village, woke up early to prepare for the market. The sky was still dark, the roads were empty, and the quietness of the morning filled him with excitement. As usual, he rode his bicycle to the nearby bridge, stopping to breathe in the fresh air before continuing on his way. At that moment, when he looked down at the river beneath the bridge, a large white object floating caught his attention. This river was very important for the village's agriculture, and there were regulations against dumping non-biodegradable objects into the water. However, today, there was a white sack floating there. Thinking it might be the carcass of an animal, he was angered and hurriedly ran down to the riverbank, using a dry branch to pull the sack up. When he did, the string tied to the sack's opening came loose, revealing a human arm, causing him to panic and quickly throw the sack back before running back up to the bridge to find help. By now, the sun had started to rise. A few other people heading to the market at the same time rushed over to help and called the police. By 6:13 a.m., the investigation team from the Shitian police station and the forensic doctor arrived to secure the scene. The area under the bridge, about 3 kilometers southeast of the village, was quiet and desolate. Therefore, the police speculated that this might not have been the main crime scene. Upon inspecting the sack, the police found that inside was only the torso and 2 arms, with the head and legs missing. The sack was wrapped in 2 layers, with the outer layer being older and more torn than the inner layer. Based on the elasticity of the skin and body parts, it was estimated that the victim was male, around 40 years old or older. The body was not wearing any clothes, and the skin had decomposed significantly due to prolonged immersion in water, making it difficult to determine the cause of death and the time of death. The flow of the Mazi River connects 3 villages, Mazi, Shizhu, and Exinju. Recently, heavy rains have caused the water to flow faster, washing away many crucial traces needed for the investigation. After checking the area and finding no further evidence, the police decided to bring the body back to the station and hold an emergency meeting to discuss the next steps in the investigation. At the police station, the investigators treated this case with great importance, as it was considered the largest dismemberment murder case in local history. They decided to use the Mazi River as the central point for their search for clues, based on the weather and the river's terrain. The police determined that the river's source was located in the Shizhu village, and its mouth was at Exinju. Given the current speed of the water, they suspected that the body might have been discarded at the river's source, in Shizhu, or possibly near Mazi, where submerged rocks and vegetation could have caused the sack to get caught. After the meeting, the investigation team split into 3 groups. The first group headed upstream to search for clues. The second group went door to door in the 3 villages to inquire about any middle-aged men who had gone missing recently. The last group continued the investigation at the crime scene. All investigators immediately set out, determined not to waste any time solving the case. The mystery of the victim's identity. At the upstream area near Shirju village, the police searched beneath the river but found no additional clues. Meanwhile, in Mazi village, nothing suspicious was discovered either. However, a new lead emerged during interviews with the locals. In Shirju, the village chief mentioned two middle-aged men, Sun Zheng, 43 years old, and Li Xin, 52 years old, who had gone missing over a month ago. They had left the village on July 30th, and since then, their families had been unable to contact them. Additionally, both Mazi and Xinju villages had reported missing persons, but later, Zhu Madong, 53, from Mazi, contacted the authorities to confirm he was safe. As for Zhang Ting, a 21-year-old from Xinju, it turned out he was not missing, but had been avoiding debt collectors, which coincided with the time he was reported as missing. Thus, the only suspicious missing persons were Sun Zheng and Li Xin. The police quickly visited their families to gather more information. Li Xin's family, poor farmers, lived in a dilapidated house with little resources. His wife told them that at the end of July, her husband repeatedly told her to take care of their children carefully because he was going to work for a while to make money, and promised to return in 3 weeks. However, over a month had passed, and she had not heard anything from him, leaving her very worried. Similarly, Sun Zheng had also told his wife and parents that he would go to earn money and would return soon, but after leaving the village, he never came back. By connecting information from both families, the police realized that Sun Zheng and Li Xin might be linked. It was possible that both had gone together to work and earn money for a short period, without contacting their families, suggesting that their work might not have been legitimate. With the rise in illegal trade in recent times, the police suspected that both might have been involved in an illicit transaction and encountered trouble during the deal. Immediately, the investigation team contacted the criminal police department for assistance in tracking down the whereabouts of the two men. Considering the growing number of illegal transactions in the area, the police speculated that the body found in the river might belong to one of the missing men from Shirju village, and the brutal act could have been carried out by organized crime groups. The investigation proceeded quickly, but the search results took an unexpected turn. Sun Zheng and Li Xin were found to be alive. Both were trapped in a complicated deal and unable to return home. With this new information, the suspicion that they were linked to the body in the river was ruled out. While the police were still puzzled, a breakthrough came from the forensic examination. The doctors discovered traces of agricultural soil under the victim's fingernails, a type of soil that was only found in the 3 villages, Mazi, Shirju, and Xinju. This meant that the victim was a local and had been killed right there. The police decided to conduct a thorough investigation, visiting each household in the 3 villages. At 9:30 a.m. on September 12th, a team of 3 officers arrived at Mazi village. Upon their investigation, they found that, apart from Zhu Madong's family, no one in Mazi village had gone missing. Neighbors reported that Zhu Madong had not been seen recently, but his family did not seem concerned, even telling the police that he had called to confirm he was safe and requested no further investigation. Suspicion around Zhu Madong's family. Noticing the strange behavior of Zhu Madong's family, the police decided to investigate further. Mrs. Jiao, the wife of Zhu Madong, lived with their son Zhu Ling, 21 years old, daughter-in-law Li Yuxiang, 19 years old, and daughter Zhu Mei, 17 years old. According to neighbors, Zhu Ling had just returned home after working away for a while. The atmosphere in the Zhu household was heavy, mainly due to Mr. Zhu's hot-tempered and authoritarian nature, which had even led to his daughter Zhu Mei suffering from depression because of his harsh words. Conflicts between Mr. Zhu and Mrs. Jiao were frequent, and neighbors claimed that he had left after a major argument with his wife. With this new information, The police became even more suspicious that the Zhu family was hiding something. When the police arrived, Mrs. Jiao angrily responded, loudly stating that her husband was fine. But the police patiently explained that they still needed the family's cooperation. They asked her to call her husband to verify his whereabouts. At that moment, Zhu Ling came out of the house, stopped his mother from speaking further, and invited the police inside. According to Zhu Ling, his father, Zhu Madong, had left the house 3 weeks ago. In early August, Zhu Ling had returned with the intention of borrowing some money to live independently, but his father had ignored his request. Out of concern for her son, Mrs. Jiao had secretly taken the land deed from the backyard to support him. When Mr. Zhu discovered this, he scolded his wife for spoiling their son and criticized Zhu Ling as a good-for-nothing. After several heated exchanges, he angrily took all the land deeds and left the house, saying, "Let's see what this family can do without me." Since then, Zhu Madong had not been in contact with the family. Mrs. Jiao guessed that he might have gone to stay with relatives or a friend. To verify this, the police decided to interrogate each family member individually, requesting the contact information of relatives and friends of Mr. Zhu. Zhu Mei, their daughter, appeared shy and avoided eye contact with the investigators, offering no useful testimony. Though there were no signs of any psychological or linguistic issues, the police gathered all the phone numbers and contacted each of Mr. Zhu's relatives and friends throughout the day, but without any results. By this point, the family began to believe that Mr. Zhu Madong had truly gone missing. Zhu Ling also reached out to his father's friends, but they all claimed that Zhu Madong had never visited their homes. Mrs. Jiao, now genuinely concerned, asked the police to continue their search for her husband, as he had taken the land deeds with him and was likely robbed. The police decided to take a blood sample from Zhu Ling to compare his DNA with the body found in the river. However, due to the limitations of forensic technology at the time, the sample had to be sent to the testing center, and it would take a few days to get the results. While waiting, they continued investigating Zhu Madong's relationships with those around him and discovered that he had a bad reputation. Not only was he strict with his family, but he also frequently quarreled with neighbors. Zhang Baobao, a neighbor living next to Mr. Dong, reported that just a few months earlier, Mr. Dong had caught and killed one of his chickens because it had wandered into his yard. The two had a heated argument, and only after the village chief intervened did things settle down. Since then, the two families stopped speaking to each other, and even when they met on the street, they ignored one another. However, Baobao noted that Mr. Dong had a habit of sitting outside his house every morning drinking tea, but since August 19th, he had not seen him around. Another villager, Lu Mengxing, had a tense relationship with Mr. Dong. They had once even fought after Mr. Dong had insinuated that Mengxing was a thief, which led to Mengxing attacking him. Overall, Mr. Dong was well known throughout the village, but he was disliked by everyone. This made the investigation difficult, as almost everyone had a reason to dislike him. Did this mean the entire village was a suspect? Clue from the mysterious floral blanket, unveiling the victim's identity. While the investigation team at Zhu Madong's home was at a standstill, a new piece of information emerged. On the afternoon of September 13th, a local from Xianju village, while searching for bamboo shoots in the mountains, discovered a blanket discarded in the woods. The blanket was tightly bound with nylon rope and emitted a strong foul odor. Curiosity led the person to untie the rope, and they were horrified to find a decomposing human body inside. Upon receiving the report, the police immediately cordoned off the area. The location of the body was about 1 kilometer from the Mazi River, on the side of Xianju village. When they examined the body, the police realized that it was 2 human legs, most likely the remains of the victim who had been discovered earlier in the river. The body was severely decomposed due to the dampness of the forest and the recent heavy rains. making it impossible to detect any further traces around the scene. The blanket tightly wrapped around the body became a crucial clue. The police called Zhu Madong's family to help identify it. When Mrs. Jiao saw the blanket, she collapsed to the ground, confirming that it belonged to her family, as there was a patch she had sewn herself. She also mentioned that the blanket had been stored in their wardrobe for a long time, and she didn't know when it had gone missing. With the evidence from the blanket, the police confirmed that the victim was Zhu Madong, 53, from Mazi village. The investigation team immediately went to his home to search for additional clues. Family members provided consistent testimonies, but Mrs. Jiao was still emotionally shaken by her husband's death, and Zhu Mei, Mr. Dong's daughter, only nodded without offering any further information. Meanwhile, the investigation team expanded their search area, hoping to find new leads. However, the constant heavy rain had likely washed away any traces the perpetrator might have left behind. Once Mrs. Jiao regained her composure, the police continued questioning her about the floral blanket at the scene. She claimed she didn't know why the blanket had appeared there, as she usually stored old blankets in the wardrobe when it got cold. However, she suddenly remembered that her husband, Zhu Madong, had taken a large black bag when he left the house, and she speculated that he might have taken the blanket with him. Seeing that Mrs. Jiao was now providing contradictory statements, the police suspected that she had not fully recovered from the shock, so they decided to temporarily suspend the interrogation. To uncover more clues, the police asked the neighbors about any unusual activity since August 19th, the last time Zhu Madong had been seen by his neighbor Zhang Baobao. Thanks to this specific timeline, new details began to emerge. A resident of Xianju village reported that on the night of August 19th, during heavy rain, he had to go to the farm to check on the poultry. From the opposite side of the river, near the forest's edge, he saw two flashlights. He shouted across the forest to warn the person on the other side that it was raining heavily and they should wait until the next day if they had something to do. Immediately, the lights went out, which startled him, and he hurriedly ran back home. Additionally, Zhang Baobao's wife mentioned that on the evening of August 18th, she saw Liu Xiang, the daughter-in-law of the Zhu family, rushing outside in a hurry. In the rural village, there were no streetlights, and the surroundings were dense with trees, making it very dangerous for a woman to go out at night. When asked, Xiang gave a quick, vague response and left immediately. To verify, the police continued their investigation at the Zhu family home and interrogated Liu Xiang about that night. However, she appeared nervous, constantly looking down, clenching her hands, and stumbling over her words, which made the police suspicious. Based on the conflicting testimonies from the family and the discovery of the body in Xianju village, the police became more convinced that Zhu Madong's son and daughter-in-law might be involved in his murder. Blood stain on the kitchen cabinet. The murderer confesses? As the police questioned Liu Xiang, Mrs. Jiao approached and asked what was happening. The police could not reveal that her son and daughter-in-law were suspects, so they only told her that they needed Xiang's cooperation and would detain her for further questioning. To ease the situation, one of the investigators pretended to be thirsty and asked Mrs. Jiao to fetch him some water. While waiting for Mrs. Jiao, the officer unexpectedly noticed a red streak inside the kitchen cabinet. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was blood. A thought flashed in his mind. Could this be the crime scene for the dismemberment? But the big question was, how could Zhu Madong's son and daughter-in-law have dismembered him right in the house without Mrs. Jiao or Zhu Mei noticing? As the officer returned with the glass of water from Mrs. Jiao, he quickly discussed his discovery with his colleagues. Moreover, the colleague responsible for tracking Liu Xiang's activities on the night of August 18th reported that she had purchased a box of batteries and some nylon strings, matching the items found at the crime scene. At this point, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, and the entire Zhu family became the prime suspects. Under the pressure of evidence and police reasoning, the three family members, Mrs. Jiao, Zhu Ling, and Li Yuxiang, eventually bowed their heads and confessed. However, when the police heard the motive for the crime, they were left in deep contemplation, as the story behind the murder was both painful and complex. The dark secret of Zhu Madong. Zhu Ling explained that he and Li Yuxiang had only married in early 2003 to quickly save enough money to live independently. Zhu Ling followed the advice of his friends and went to the city to work. However, he soon realized that city life wasn't suitable for him, so he decided to return to the village. When he arrived home, he discovered a horrifying truth. During his absence, his father, known for being strict and distant, had revealed a disturbing and twisted side. Zhu Madong began to engage in inappropriate behavior with Li Yuxiang, his new daughter-in-law. At first, he would secretly watch her bathe or change clothes, but his actions gradually became bolder. Mrs. Jiao discovered this, but instead of condemning her husband, she blamed her daughter-in-law for not being more discreet. Zhu Madong took advantage of this protective stance to continue his repulsive actions, and things worsened over time. By May, when their youngest daughter went to school and Mrs. Jiao went to the market, the house was left with just Mr. Zhu and his daughter-in-law. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Zhu Madong stormed into Xiang's room and assaulted her. Despite her resistance, she was eventually forced to endure it. Afterward, Mr. Zhu apologized and promised not to repeat the act, as long as she kept silent. Li Yuxiang, naive and trusting, endured the abuse in silence, hoping that Zhu Madong would keep his promise. However, just a week later, he continued his immoral behavior towards her. Mrs. Jiao, aware of the situation, felt helpless and seemed unable to do anything. But on June 1st, when she discovered a horrifying truth beyond her imagination, she finally became enraged and resolved to take action. That day, as usual, Mrs. Jiao planned to go out with other women from the village. However, halfway through, she felt dizzy and decided to return home. Upon arriving, she noticed strange sounds coming from her youngest daughter Zhu Mei's room. Curious, she gently pushed the door open and was horrified to find her husband, Zhu Madong, lying on the bed beside Zhu Mei, both of them completely naked. Shocked, she slammed the door, startling Zhu Madong, while Zhu Mei remained silent, crying. On her face was a clear expression of resignation, as if this was not the first time it had happened. It turned out that for a year, Zhu Madong had abused his position of trust in the family to commit atrocious acts with his own daughter, leading to Zhu Mei developing depression, withdrawing from others, and never sharing her pain. Perhaps, feeling that speaking out would change nothing, Zhu Mei chose silence. At the same time, Li Yuxiang, the daughter-in-law, was also assaulted by Zhu Madong, compounding the family's agony. After this horrific discovery, Mrs. Jiao finally stood up and demanded that Zhu Madong stop. However, he not only refused but also slapped her, claiming she had no right to intervene. Realizing she could not protect her daughter, Mrs. Jiao decided to wait until her son, Zhu Ling, returned in August to tell him everything. Upon hearing the full story, Zhu Ling was stunned and asked his wife to confirm it. The three of them, Zhu Ling, Li Yuxiang, and Mrs. Jiao, sat down together to figure out a solution. Unexpectedly, it was Mrs. Jiao who suggested that the only way for the family to find peace was to make Zhu Madong disappear forever. After some deliberation, they decided to take action. The premeditated murder plan. On the afternoon of August 18th, they put their plan into motion. Mrs. Jiao prepared dinner as usual, but mixed sleeping pills into the portions for her husband and youngest daughter. After the meal, Zhu Mei went to her room and fell asleep early, while Zhu Madong also passed out by 6:30 p.m. Taking advantage of the situation, Zhu Ling, carrying a length of rope, entered his father's room and strangled him under the watchful eyes of his mother and wife. The murder was carried out swiftly, but the real challenge was hiding the crime. According to their confessions, after the murder on the night of August 18th, they moved Zhu Madong's body into the kitchen. Mrs. Jiao laid down a plastic sheet to prevent blood from spreading. Zhu Ling used a knife to dismember his father's body into 3 parts: the head, torso, and legs, with the help of his mother and wife. After dismembering the body, Mrs. Jiao cleaned the scene, while Zhu Ling wrapped the body parts, and Li Yuxiang went out to buy additional flashlights and nylon ropes to aid in the disposal of the remains. At first, they intended to dispose of the body parts in the Mazi River, but Li Yuxiang feared that dumping them in one location would be too obvious. She suggested scattering the parts in different locations. The head of Zhu Madong was buried behind the house, about 3 meters from the pigsty. The torso was carried by Zhu Ling to the Mazi riverbank and thrown into the water. On the night of August 19th, Zhu Ling and his wife wrapped the legs in the blanket, walked along the riverbank to Xianzhu village, and threw them there. In the heavy rain, they believed no one would notice, but a local spotted their flashlight and yelled out. Frightened, they quickly turned off the light, discarded the body parts, and hurried back home. To mislead the investigation, Zhu Ling fabricated a story and instructed the family to remember it in case they needed to share it with others. Since Zhu Madong already had a bad reputation, the neighbors didn't pay much attention to the incident, and it wasn't until the police arrived to investigate the missing persons report that anyone took notice. Severe sentence and controversial opinions. When the case went to trial, public opinion was divided. Some people argued that the perpetrators did not deserve a harsh punishment, as what Zhu Madong had done was horrific, and they were only acting in self-defense. However, many others disagreed, stating that the family could have reported the crimes to the authorities and let the law protect them. They criticized Mrs. Jiao for covering up for her husband, allowing him to harm their daughter-in-law, and argued that she would not have spoken out if she hadn't caught her husband and daughter in that painful situation. Ultimately, the court sentenced all 3, Zhu Ling, Li Yuxiang, and Mrs. Jiao, to death for premeditated murder and dismemberment to conceal the crime. This case was a tragedy, where the victim was also the perpetrator. Zhu Madong's wrongdoings not only harmed his daughter-in-law, but also ruined his biological daughter's life. The case also serves as a reminder of the lack of understanding in this family. Instead of contacting the police, they chose the extreme solution of murder, leading to a tragic outcome. What do you think about this case? Who do you believe is truly at fault in this situation? Please share your thoughts in the comments, and let's discuss. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.